welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I'm here with G. Murray Thomas.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a few years since we've talked.
Yes, it has
I
indeed.
think the last time we
So I have a confession right off the bat. I
okay.
have never watched one of these, so I have no idea what to expect.
Oh, it's just a 35-minute conversation about it. We're probably going to talk about poetry and what's going on with you and everything that's been going on with pretty much everybody the last couple of years here.
Yeah.
So that was actually going to be one of my topics that I was going to bring up to you, which I've talked to a few other writers about, which is, are you sick of writing about COVID related stuff?
Uh, um, I actually have not written much about COVID at all, um, because my circumstances were very different. um, I mean, I guess to go into it, um, I spent the last 4 years taking care of my parents, both of whom had dementia. And COVID was, in a weird way, good timing because at the point when we had to start isolating, both of their mental conditions had reached a point where they could not successfully socialize anyway, but they would want to. They would want to go to church and they would want to go out, and they just couldn't have a normal conversation because their brains just weren't firing. So, going into lockdown isolation was very fitting for us. And it didn't, and since I was, I mean, I had aides, so we did hire aides to help with them, but most of my focus was on taking care of them. So it wasn't like there was a whole lot of stuff I would have been doing and going out to anyway. It just seemed to kind of make sense to stay home with them all the time. So I didn't, I didn't feel deprived of much by COVID because my life was, in that weird situation anyway.
Well, I guess that makes sense. Like you said, it was kind of a mixed blessing. Do you kind of feel like, kind of in the same sense that the topic of 9/11, that COVID's going to be kind of something that sticks with us in terms of writers, where we're going to, it's going to be with us and carried with us, for writing and things like that. Somebody's manuscript is always going to have 2 to 3 references to what's
I think,
happened in the last 2 years.
yeah, I do think so. I think it was I mean, in its own way, it was as traumatic as 9/11. I think I mean, it disrupted a lot more people's lives. And I also think that it it changed certain things about how we live and especially about how we do business that I don't think are ever going to go back completely to the way they were. I mean, especially take working from home. I mean, that works for some people. I mean, that doesn't work for some people. Some jobs you have to be there. Some people thrive on, the being in a work situation, but other people just found working at home was the best thing in the world. And like my sister and her boyfriend, they my boyfriend still is not her boyfriend still has not gone back into the office, and she goes in once a week.
Yeah,
And
I speaking personally, like I've only worked part-time, unfortunately, since the lockdown. It's just been really hard for me, but I know people who were already kind of working from home, and for them, it's like they barely even, I mean, everybody who had kids, like I
yeah,
have a young daughter who was much younger at that time, and it was kind of like always having to turn around and making sure that her online learning was going well and entertaining when you're got to focus. That was really tough.
yeah,
But yeah, I just feel like I agree with you on a lot of that stuff, that we are definitely much more homebodies than we used to be. Although so much stuff has opened up now in the last. uh,
yeah.
Although I don't know if I believe the president when he said, "Oh yeah, today is the day COVID's over." I was like, "Oh, there's a
Well,
day and there's a
I
time you can just
think
do that. That's kind of neat."
okay. I actually just recovered from COVID. I got well, it's kind of hard to tell when I actually got it because I got sick and still tested negative, and then a week later tested positive. So it's all kind of fuzzy in there. But it was like a bad cold. I mean, I did for the first 2 days I slept nonstop.
Yeah.
But then it was just like I had a bad cold and felt a little run down. I still feel a little run down, but I don't think, and even I'm immunocompromised. I had a transplant. I'm in the high risk category, and I never came close to feeling like, oh my God, I got to go to the hospital. This is killing me. So I
That's
think,
what everybody's been telling me. Like I had my vaccinations and everything, and I never got it, thank God. But everybody that I know that got it, so like, yeah, it was just a really, especially I want to say 2020, 2021,
yeah.
before the thing morphed into, I don't know, whatever we're calling it now, monkeypox. To me, monkeypox sounds like a band opening for somebody in the 90s. I don't know. It
I bet
just
you if you did a Google search, there'd be one.
probably, right? I don't know. I just kind of feel like everybody said it was a really strong flu. It knocked you on your ass
Yeah.
for 3 to 5 days, and then you got over it. It was just the thing that the scary thing, I think, like what you were saying, is people who already had pre-existing medical conditions. It was like it could be deadly. But also people who work in an office, I understand why a lot of those places got shut down because it was like one person gets it,
Yeah.
you can't have a workforce just be depleted and overnight. But
Yeah.
well, here's the thing too that I'll bring up that's sort of related to that, which was I'm sure you noticed this too, that probably the second half of 2020, first half of 2021, there were a lot of poetry anthologies geared toward people's experiences with COVID.
Yeah.
And I got it at the time, which was it was a way for people to process and understand and work through mental and emotional things that they're going through. But I got to tell you, like, I am so sick of reading COVID theme poems. Like a manuscript that I'm working on, I have a couple in there, but I can't foresee me, at least I can't speak for you, but putting out something that's just all about COVID or all about living through that time
Right.
where
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, 9/11, the same sort of thing happened, and I can even remember back to the first Iraq war. There were a whole bunch of anthologies of poetry against the war. And I mean, I think it's something poets do. They react to stuff. But I think on the deeper level, is the more curious question is how is this experience going to affect our writer in 5 or 10 years from now?
right.
And even if you're not specifically writing about it, it it affected you and how it affected all of us and how we think about things, how we think about socializing, how we think about entertainment. And that's the sort of thing that is going to seep into writing. And you may not even be able to say, oh yeah, this is because of COVID, but it's going to have an effect on arts for years to come.
Oh yeah, there's I can't remember which magazine it was. There was an interview with Stephen King where he was talking about doing some writing during the lockdown, and I guess the scene or the story took place on a cruise ship. And he said he was like, 5, 10, 15 pages into writing, and he goes, I got to have this story take place in 2019. No one's going to
Yeah.
believe this story takes place now or even in the last
Mm-hmm.
3 years. It's got to be 2019 or before because of all of the conditions and the
Yeah.
situations. No one's going to go on a cruise ship and wear a mask. That's not going to be fun for anybody. So you're totally right. It totally affected. And I think that with TV and movies and things like that, they just don't talk about it. It's like something that some shows have worked it into it, but if they're
Yeah.
like fantasy or things like that, they just kind of leapfrogged from 2019 to 2022, and I don't know if they just everybody just wants to kind of get their mind around it and kind of go, okay, how can we do this delicately and not
Yeah.
offend everybody that's had a family member affected by this. So how are things going with you in terms of your writing? Are you working on some stuff?
Well, as I say, been, taking care of my parents, and I've actually had a Patreon page which I use to blog about that, basically. So, and just to finish, they both died last year, and so, and I mean, we're still dealing with the after effects of that. We just, fingers crossed, sold the house, but so I'm hoping to work with those blogs and and put together a book about the experience of caring for your parents, when both of them had dementia, and totally uprooting my life in order to do it. And I think nowadays, obviously, more and more people are finding themselves in this situation, that our population's getting older. Healthcare is getting better, but that means that people live into their 90s, and they live long enough to have their mind fall apart too.
Right.
Which wasn't necessarily the case even 50 years ago. So there's an explosion of people who have to take care of their parents. And then the other thing is, and this is something that COVID revealed, our healthcare system is broken, and it is certainly not in any way, shape, or form set up to take care of people who have long-term permanent needs. It's just
Right.
not.
And everything that was affected in the last 2 years, the cost of everything rises. I mean, I know that you're not indifferent to what happened this year with the gas prices, because man, when the gas prices went up, the cost of groceries shot through the
Yeah.
roof, and everybody's going like, well, wait a minute, I'm not making any more money than I was a year ago, and the cost of everything is through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like everywhere you go, probably in the town that you're in too, you see a lot of the help wanted or hiring signs for
Yeah.
jobs. And a lot of the frustrating conversations I've had with people is like, you can't just go and get a job at like a bookstore or a Walmart or a restaurant or something like you could 10 or 15 years ago and live off that.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
going to cover rent or a car payment or groceries or medication or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's almost like there's this unspoken thing of like, well, this is good enough for you. You can do this. Oh, well, why don't you work at Walmart and Home Depot and do an app-based,
Yeah.
Uber Eats or Lyft or something? And then it's like, well, then you're working all the time and you're still not making all your bills. And it's like
Yeah.
so much for the American dream. I guess the American dream is like you dream of sleep.
Yeah. Really. Really. Yeah. I don't. Um. Yeah. And there was. I mean, people's wages did go up. That. I mean, now I see a lot of those help wanted signs, but most of them are starting at $15 an hour, which was unheard of before COVID. But they're not keeping pace. The inflation is still going up more, and I mean, not to get too political, but corporate profits are still going up more than wages are, and the richer are still getting rich, and it's just the economy just doesn't share its bounty.
Oh yeah, I mean that's something that I personally, having been laid off during COVID which was just the worst time to get laid off. But
Yeah.
at the time, and I've said this before, but excuse me if I'm like a broken record here, but I was renting a room out of a house in Laguna Niguel, having a daughter with me, half the week and everything. And that was still $1,000 a month to rent a room out of a house.
Wow.
Just have access to the kitchen, bathroom and
Yeah.
living room, which, was great because that served its purpose for me to get her into, a good elementary school, good middle school and all that. And that was important for me. But then it was like in my mind, I'm going, I paid less for this than a full apartment in LA.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and it's like the cost of it, and it's like when my landlord sold that building on short notice because they wanted to get out of town when the COVID thing happened, because they weren't really pulling people in, or their other properties they weren't having.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like so many people I know went through that, where it was like the cost of everything shot up, and then people were like, but what do we do with what money? Where's
Yeah.
the money
Yep.
going to come from? Thank God we had that shot in the arm of whatever the relief money was.
Yeah.
That didn't last forever. But I'll get off my soapbox here. I don't know if you have a poem close by, if you would like to read something
Yeah,
here.
I've picked out a couple I can read. Let me. Okay, these are. I mean, I have not written a whole lot of poems, but like I say most of my writing energy went into writing the blog.
Right.
Um, but these are a couple about my experiences of the past few years. Okay, this one is called The Day. This is a semi-pantoum. It's kind of funny when I was writing it. It kind of declared I'm a pantoum, and I'm like, no, you're not. No, I don't write those. I just do not write that kind of poems. And it's like, nope, I'm a pantoum. Just trust me on this. So, and like, it's not remotely a perfect pantoum, but it is kind of a pantoum. Okay. Today, his doctor told my father he shouldn't drive anymore. There were suddenly so many errands to run. I ran into the mailbox and delivered his newspaper late. There were so many errands to run, but the snow piled deep in the driveway, and the snowplow was late. The mail never came. The snow piled high against the walls. My mother argued with her caregiver and then read the same letter over and over. The turkeys ran wild in the yard. My mother argued with her caregiver because she said she didn't need a caregiver. Later, they watched the turkeys run wild and the starlings battle at the bird feeder. My mother said she didn't need her walker. My father, mystified by the remote, missed his favorite show. The bird feeder became a TV. My mother almost fell down. My father was mystified that he couldn't drive anymore. I fell asleep and drove my car into a ditch.
Jeez, that's great. Is that fairly recent?
It's a couple of years ago. I mean, that one's when that was at a point, like I say, that my father was getting bad enough that we didn't want him driving, and the only way we could get him to stop driving was to have his doctor send him a letter saying you shouldn't drive anymore, because he wouldn't listen to us.
Right.
He would argue with us, but then and pretty much everything in there happened to some degree that they, I don't know, that was one side of life in that house.
Right.
This one's called Waiting Room. The silence is a forest of bare trees. A gray sky hovers near the ceiling. Through the glass, snow covers the car, the deck, the hillside. Or is that just a memory? There is no child to play in it, only photographs, a couple skiing, the hunt for a Christmas tree, 6-foot drifts from a blizzard. There are so many photographs, filled with people I no longer recognize. The ghosts of those still present sit with me. We wait for the bodies to arrive.
Wow. I enjoyed that. So a quick plug for the most recent books that I know from you. My Kidney just arrived, and Cows on the Freeway. Do you feel like the writing that you're working on now over the last couple of years is working toward a poetry manuscript, or are you thinking more like essays or?
Well, I do. I mean, one of the things I did over the past years was I took, I started out with, because I was in kind of a tourist town. I was in the Finger Lakes, a lot of beautiful scenery. So I started buying like typical tourist postcards and composing haiku
Oh, cool.
on them and sending out to a certain group of people. And as I went along, I mean, the haiku just started out being like, kind of describing what the pictures were, but that, my whole situation worked its way into the haiku, and found I was writing more and more haiku about memory and about forgetting things and things like that. Um, and then I moved on to, okay, my father was a photographer and my mother was an amateur artist. And so I would find pictures and drawings of theirs and start writing haiku based on those. So I do have a bunch of haiku that relate to my experiences, which I will probably include in the book, which is mostly going to be prose, mostly going to be essays. I am, I mean, at one point I looked through, I have almost enough unpublished poems to create a book. It wouldn't, you know, it'd cover a whole variety of things. It wouldn't be a themed book. It would just be, because even, I mean, there are a bunch of poems I wrote like 20 years ago. God, that's how long ago it was, yeah. That didn't go into the kidney book because the kidney book was specifically about the transplant. So I've got poems going back that far that haven't been published in a book, and others that I've written since. But like I say, it's a whole, there's some political poems and there are nature poems and some, and then these things I'm writing now. So it's, like I say, I've considered, putting together another manuscript. It just still feels pretty thin. So I think I might need
No,
to.
I get you. I get you. It's kind of like you've got the themed kind of essay manuscript kind of
Yeah.
writing itself, as it were, and then you've got just uncollected poems from the last few
Yeah.
years that, give it another year or two and
Yeah,
something
I mean,
just
it could
turn
probably
the
make a
corner.
good chapbook. I don't think I've got enough for a full volume, even though the distinction is getting harder and harder to tell these days.
Yeah, I've read some long books.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, wait a minute. I think I read one a couple months ago. I can't remember where it was, and somebody just kind of handed it to me in the store, and I read it, and I was going like, "It says like 30 poems. Is this
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's like novella, novel.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I guess there's a word count number for a novella where it becomes a novel, but I don't know about a chapbook becoming a. I always thought like 40 poems was about a full book of poems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's kind of my
it's
feeling.
like at a certain point, maybe whoever the writer was just saying like, I'm just gonna put everything in. This is what I've got, and just take
Yeah.
it. And I might not. And it's true. There is that kind of mentality, especially when you're starting out, where it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna get to do another one of these. I got to put out everything I got and just
Yeah.
hope for the best and see what happens.
Yep. Yep.
So I guess I wanted to also kind of thank you for all of your time working on Next Magazine. Just because when I first got into doing poetry and going to the open mics, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what was
Yeah.
going on. And I just remember going to the readings and picking up the pamphlet and going like, holy shit. Because it's like, even with Google and being able to search, they're not
Mhm.
going to tell you if the place has changed the dates. Sometimes they don't
Right.
change the
Yeah.
time. Sometimes you go and you have a bad experience. And I love the I love the coffee cartel, but man, you got to time your reading there when you're doing the open because when the coffee grinder starts, you stop. Because I know
Yeah.
sometimes people try to plow through, and it's like that is a losing battle, my friend. They are
Yeah.
there to sell coffee and snacks. The poetry reading is secondary. They're not going to stop because you have some epic poem to read. Like, holy shit, Eric's working through something. We better stop for like 5 minutes and let the line go out through the door. No. I
No.
mean, and you've been there before too, where you talk to people that are just kind of getting into going to open readings and open mics, and they get so pissed and worked up, and they're like, and then there were people coming in that were talking during my reading, and it's like, just read your stuff.
Yeah. 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 I mean,
You just got to get through it, you know? So I guess if you want to give us the kind of the cliff notes of how that kind of got started for you and how you kind of got involved in that with Next Magazine.
Well, okay, there. When I first started going to poetry readings in Southern California, there was a publication called Out Loud, which was like two sheets. There was just the calendar, and they put it together every month, and it listed all the main readings, in Southern California, and it was again a very extremely valuable resource. But eventually they folded for various reasons. And about that time, I was trying my hand at book publishing. So I was publishing, I published Paper Shredders, the surf anthology, a couple other anthologies, a couple of books by friends of mine. And that's what I wanted to do. But my friend Larry Schultz came up to me and he said, you should do something like Out Loud. You got the facilities, and we need something like that again. And somehow he talked me into it. And it just, once we got going, it was pretty exciting to do, but it was also, very draining. But
Very arduous, I can imagine that.
yeah, and we, honestly, my idea was I wanted to be the Rolling Stone of spoken word. And I had lots of ambitions and just wasn't able to pull it off. Part of that is just, there isn't the market for poetry that there is for music. And part of it just I'm a terrible businessman. I have no business sense whatsoever.
But I think you would agree though too, because I was just talking to Mike Songson a couple months ago, and
Okay.
poetry books and collections and anthologies, which I kind of thought anthologies and chapbooks were kind of going by the wayside with the internet and everything,
Yeah.
but they're showing up in
Yeah.
stores. Like I was telling him, I was just killing time doing laundry a couple months ago and wandered into a Target, and I was like, there's a whole row of poetry books in Target.
Wow.
And I went,
Wow.
because like you expect those stores, or grocery stores to have the old spindle racks right
Right.
next to
Yeah.
checkout where you get the latest paper rack, or there's some small section in the school supply area where they've got magazines and like I said, the popular
Yeah.
bestsellers of the day in their paperback version or something. But when I saw like a whole row of poetry stuff, I was like, and a lot of that has to do just with I think younger people really coming across on the
Yeah.
internet. And the woman who read the poem at the I think was it the Biden inauguration,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
published that, and so that's there pretty much
Yeah.
anywhere you go now. So in my mind I kept thinking, oh, it had kind of fallen off, but I also thought, well, a few years ago, attendance to readings and open mics kind of died away too. And then from what
Yeah.
I'm hearing from people, like, no, you've got colleges where people just are trying to get out there. There's this hunger for somewhere people can go to express themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's vibrant. It's still happening. I guess I'll ask this for some of our friends here in Southern California. We're all kind of wondering about you in terms of, do you have a game plan in the next couple of years? Is it to sell the house and stay in that area? Are you planning to come back to the Long Beach County
I
area?
do have a game plan. I just I rented an apartment here, kind of in the suburbs, but in a nice little town. And I've signed a year lease, so that runs through end of June. I signed it July 1st. So I'm definitely here for that. My plan is to literally to drive across the country next summer,
Oh, wow.
to go visit all sorts of people scattered around that I haven't seen in years, visit some of the places that, I lived earlier. And sort of there's a notion, back of my head notion, that I will at the very least leave myself open to possibilities of new places I could move, and see as I drive across the country, whether I hit somewhere and I'm like, wow, this is it. This is where I need to live. I mean, I'm tempted to go back to Southern California, but I would really, I would have to find the right place, the right living situation. I mean, you're talking about rents and I mean, I'm renting a nice 2-bedroom apartment for 1,200. So I don't,
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, I'm renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Fullerton that is okay for right now. I don't want to be here in this facility forever, but just, like I said, the short notice that I had to get into
yeah,
some place, and I'm paying about 18,
wow, yeah,
and I feel way too much.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's LA, that's Orange County. But yeah, so you've traveled around the country, lived around the country. We are both from states where it snows a lot. I
Yeah.
live with my family and my friends in Ohio. I need to get back and visit. I can't ever see living in a place that's gonna snow 4 or 5 months of the year. Do you see yourself
Well,
in the future that you're okay with that?
well, for one thing, whatever it's like to live here in the winter, winter is not a good time for driving across the country. So I kind of have to wait till spring anyway.
Right.
And we still have a lot of loose ends tied up and such. The other thing is, I don't know how long ago you lived in Ohio.
About 20 years.
Okay, winter is different. When I was growing up here in Rochester, you usually got a white Christmas, and then there is usually snow on the ground until April.
Right.
Okay, not anymore. It snows, it melts.
Right.
A couple of weeks later, it snows again, and then it all melts again. There's no permanent snow cover, at least for the 4 winters I've lived here so far. There has not been any permanent snow country. In fact, last winter, we paid a guy like $500 to plow our driveway every time it stormed, just like because before we were paying per plowing.
Right.
Okay, we signed the contract. It did not snow again. We signed the contract in January, and the driveway did not need plowing again.
Oh, that's so typical.
So winter, it's very different. It's more like, like I would imagine, winter in, say, the middle Atlantic, like Washington, D.C. area, or it gets cold, you get the snow, but then you get a lot of like 40, 50-degree days in the middle of January and February. It's crazy.
That's true. I guess I just have these memories of being a teenager and shoveling the driveway, shoveling the stairs, and being bitter cold and
Yeah.
wind chill factor and all that stuff. And that's pretty much gone away from what you and other people have told me. But we do have just a few minutes left. I was wondering if you could treat us with maybe another poem or two, if you have them. If you don't have them there, that's fine. I don't have.
Well, I got some here. I'm just trying to decide what. Okay, I mean, I don't know. I could do Charlie Brown.
Okay.
Brown
Yeah. That'll work.
Okay. And this, just to give some background to this, the Ugly Mug, of course. And at some point, and I forget who started it, but the regulars at the Ugly Mug started writing poems about the Peanuts characters as adults in inappropriate situations. So that's what this one is. It's called Charlie Brown in the Strip Club. He would not normally be in a place like this, but the invitation for a drink from his co-workers was such a rarity that he accepted without asking where they were going. He tries to hide his embarrassment, his eyes shifting nervously from the nakedness on stage to his rapidly warming beer. But when she walks on stage, his face turns as red as her hair, and his companions can't help but notice. He is so flummoxed he does not see their heads bent in conspiracy, the money counted out and passed along. Just suddenly, there she is, writhing in his lap. She doesn't seem to recognize him, but did she ever even notice him back then? He knows that this was never what he wanted. Nonetheless, his heart pounds, his skin sweats, his hands hover mere inches from her still unattainable flesh.
That's great. Oh, that's a great idea. I love the concept too.
Yeah.
I found a cartoon someone posted, and I think maybe Steve saw it, and I think I tagged him on it, which was the Peanuts gang as the survivors of the Arctic base in The Thing, and Snoopy was kind of the creature, and they were gonna burn him with the flamethrowers. Like, burn him. It's the only way we'll survive. Yeah, it's great. Well, I guess to wrap it up here, where can people find your work? And I think you have a website. I'll let you plug that too.
I do have a website. I have not been able to update it for a couple of years because the computer I was using to update it crashed, and I have not managed to replace the software that I was using because it, of course, was discontinued 10 years ago. The great web creating software that's basically as used to desktop publishing, and it was just like desktop publishing to create web pages. So anyway, my web page, which is gmurraythomas.com, is at least 2 or 3 years out of date.
But people can go and see your work and samples.
Yeah, you can still read some poems, and you can still, I think most of the YouTube links are still good.
Okay.
A lot of the links to my published work is, again, someone else failed to monitor a website, and they say the internet is forever, but it's not. Stuff disappears.
Stuff disappears.
I mean, maybe it's somewhere on some hard drive somewhere, but accessing it is
Do you have a YouTube channel where people can see your work, or everything's just kind of through the website?
I do have a YouTube channel. Again, not really that well maintained, but I do have a YouTube channel. I think it's Murray Thomas, but maybe it's G Murray Thomas.
Okay.
And then, of course, you can order Cows on the Freeway from Amazon. The kidney book is a little harder because they didn't keep up with the making it available. Let's put it that way. Okay. So, I mean, there's still copies out there if you can find one, but
fair enough. I mean, you've got so much stuff out there, and I think everything on the site. And I just wanted to thank you for being on the show.
Okay.
We've been trying to make this.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And hopefully you'll make it back to Southern California at least to visit and do.
Well, yeah, I certainly plan to visit next summer. Look for me next summer. But
all right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and
thank you.
Have a great week, man.
You too. All right.
Bye-bye.